back in July of 2018. And it really was back in 2006. I went to a spine meeting, actually up at Whistler. Um, and at that spine meeting, they introduced a product called the X-Stop. And it was a treatment for stenosis, in other words, a narrowing around the nerves as one gets older, that was relatively minimally invasive. And so I looked at it at the time, and I thought about it a lot, and I thought that I could do better, and then started working on an invention. And it took a few years. I partnered with someone else. We eventually brought in investors, formed a company. But the bottom line is that that particular implant, if you look at it, is for lack of a better term, it's an expensive molly bolt. So if you want a wall hanger, so something, if you want to hang something on the wall, it looks extremely similar, although obviously much more expensive. So that was where it all started. And when I invented that, we found out that FDA would require that it survive 5 million cycles of compression, 5 million of torque without loosening, to simulate 40 years of a lifespan. And so then I had to come up with something to lock it into the spine, and that was really the forerunner to the technology that's in Enduralock.
Wow. So from this history of neurology through this scope, you ended up seeing something that ties together the things that are most valuable to us. Like what Enduralock makes is fasteners that are used inside people and used for inside space.
Well, that's true. I mean, basically, the technology to lock it into the spine would make it extremely high vibration resistant. And, there was a lot of modification that went into it to develop it more for industrial use or for use in space. But over the course of a number of years, we refined that technology, and, here we are, now potentially having it in space. And, for that matter, in just common things like it's used, for example, product was purchased by Procter & Gamble for use in paper manufacturing machines. So I guess if you use Charmin, indirectly, we had an involvement.
Hey, that was pretty serious business over the last year or so. And this is Dr. Harold Hess of Enduralock talking about his incredible inventions that have been solving problems wherever fasteners are used. It's such an interesting insight, and welcome to Leadership Line of Sight. My name is Taylor. I am the marketing strategist at Gravidia, and I'm with you as always, Scott. Scott Connors, the Chief Change Officer at Crankset Group. Good to see everybody today. Thank you so much for joining us, Harold. How's everybody doing this morning?
Doing great. Looking forward to the weekend.
That's fantastic. You were saying that the weather's pretty mild. You're coming to us from Kansas. We've got Scott. Scott, you are over in Washington?
Oregon.
Close. And myself up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And where I had first come into recommendation that I had to talk to Harold was from the team at ArisMD. Now, ArisMD was one among the group that actually you were in NASA iTech winner with. Is that correct?
That's correct. We were in Cycle 1 in 2019, and there were 3 winners. You can see Scott and Chandra in the middle, and I'm on the end with my COO, Diana, who's holding our award.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're just showing a picture of NASA iTech where they were recognizing that the fasteners that you were creating were solving problems. You were saying that the places that we need to hold things together, they're constantly suffering vibrations. And really the way that a nut and bolt work, as soon as they start to become loose, the only thing they really do from there is become looser.
That's true. And the unfortunate part is that be it just general folk or even engineers working on high tech things like at NASA. Often fasteners are taken for granted. It's something that many of us think of as you stop at Home Depot or and you pick up a nut and bolt, and that's the extent of it. But really, they form a critical link for very high tech projects.
And low tech as well, right, Harold? I mean, I learned that lesson with $10,000 worth of mountain bikes on the back of my truck when the fastener came loose on the highway. I mean, fasteners hold a critical role. They are the conjunctive piece that marries point A to point B when they have to interface and stay together.
Right. I saw a joke once, showing a man, a caveman, pushing essentially like a wheelbarrow, and the punchline was, well, what good is a wheel if you don't have something to attach it with?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well
I also actually was thinking about measuring this in time. So when you take a look at tractor trailer units and how much time they spend torquing all of the wheel nuts, imagine if that wasn't as much of a factor. Is that something that a Endurolock could affect?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's likely that with a simple 6-point socket, the mechanic could install it, and it would be locked. And in essence, it's permanently locked unless you put that 6-point socket back on it, and then it's easily reversible and reusable. So it will not vibrate loose.
That's
in aerospace, actually, a requirement for a self-locking nut is to withstand 30,000 cycles of vibration. We took ours up to 300,000. And for an oil and gas customer, we took it up to 1 million. So it is far and beyond what the requirements are for aerospace. And the test is fairly severe. I mean, if you can imagine, they take two pieces of metal, they drill a hole in one, they drill a slot in the other, and put the fastener through, a little bit of machine oil, and then the machine moves the two pieces of metal relative to each other so that the fastener goes back and forth in that slot at a half-inch travel at 30 hertz or 30 times a second, and it has to survive 300,000 or 30,000. Excuse me. Ours went 300.
Wow, that's incredible. And like to think about how universal this is, about how many different things this can affect. We have this display of some of the products that Endurolock offers. Can you show us what we're looking at?
Sure. I mean, on the two on the, I don't see the. Okay, there we go. The two on the left represent our Radial lock fastener. It's a totally machine product. The one totally on the left is our locking bolt. So that, in other words, when you put a socket on that, it's a free running bolt. But as soon as you remove the socket, it locks into the washer and into the panel that it's attached to. The next one over is a Radial locking nut. Then we get into our silver lock fastener. In let's see, third from the left would be our silver lock bolt. Fifth from the left would be our silver lock locking nut. The two on the right are our Untitled lock technology, and the one in the middle is a totally different technology, and that is the first self-aligning nut plate. And by the way, each of these have different applications, advantages, disadvantages. The ones on totally on the left, the Radial lock, probably are most robust, but on the other hand, it's a totally machine product, so totally CNC machine, so it's the most expensive. Mm-hmm. The two on the total, all the way to the right, are probably our cheapest, but there is a slight weight penalty, so not ideal for aerospace, but for ground applications, they're perfect. And then the two on either side of the nut plate in the middle, that's our silver lock, and that is the one that we believe is the ideal fastener for use in space.
That's incredible. And so here where I am, so many of the businesses are involved in the oil field. And they're dealing with problems that they may not even know this is the solution to. Being that you come from neurology, what are the symptoms that they should be looking for that says I should be seeking something like Enduralock?
For patients or for people in the oil field?
People in the oil field and then patients, now that
Okay.
you've opened that door.
All right. Well, the thing is, going back a little bit, it was actually a month before we won NASA iTech that we won a Shell oil competition. And I met with engineers from Shell over at The Hague, and they felt that the fasteners could be applied across the oil and gas industry, specifically for pipelines and the pipes in refineries. If you think about the following, let's say you have a pipeline in a desert, or even up in Alberta. I'm sure during the day it's a lot warmer than it is at night. Well, what happens when you have those temperature changes, when it's relatively speaking hot, the bolts get a little bit longer. When it cools down, the bolts contract. They get a little bit shorter. Well, if that happens on a constant basis, every day gets longer, shorter, well, guess what? Over a period of time, those bolts loosen. If you look at the bolts that are used in pipelines, they're typically just normal bolts. I mean, they're large, 2-inch, 3-inch diameter, but they're normal bolts. There is no locking bolt at a size greater than 1.5 inches that is currently available anywhere. So if you think of those, you torque them, when you install them to a high degree to try to prevent them from loosening, but that cyclical expansion contraction makes them loosen. And with the loosening, guess what? You end up with an oil leak. What we designed is a locking fastener that can be scaled. So, for example, at last year's Offshore Technology Conference, which is one of the biggest conferences for oil and gas, we showed a 2-inch diameter fastener that permanently locks. So if it's locked, it's not going to be affected by the changes in length. It remains locked regardless. And that's actually the primary reason why our fasteners are ideal for space. Think about it. You can have a minus 180 degrees, and then you get into the sun. You can go up to 500 or 600 degrees on the positive side. So that wide range causes fasteners or assemblies to fail. Ours remain locked.
That's interesting. And how does that apply when we go inside people?
Well, I mean, the implant that I designed basically is something that distracts the spinous processes. In other words, the bones you feel when you feel your backbone. And in so doing, indirectly opens up the space or the canal where all the nerves are. But the thing is, if you just put something in as a spacer and didn't lock it in place, then as the person moves over, in their daily life, that thing would vibrate out. So what I came up with in addition was, for that implant, how do you lock it in place? So in other words, that regardless, it stays in place, it's locked. And so it was really just the locking technology that became the locking technology or rudimentary technology from which Enduralock was born.
That's incredible. Is there anything like I've been looking into this before I talked to you, Harold, and just seeing like where you had come from to seek to solve these types of things. It's really interesting to me that you would leave a place like medicine to go strictly into the invention of things.
It's been an interesting road. I mean, I continued to practice as a neurosurgeon for a number of years while we were trying to bring the spine company to fruition. In essence, what I ended up doing was all of my vacation time would be spent traveling either to Europe or numerous places here in the U.S. or Israel, teaching surgeons how to put the implant in. So, in essence, I had two jobs. I had my job as a neurosurgeon. I had my job as a medical director and co-founder, co-manager of my spine company. So it was interesting because, as in any field, you have trade shows. And so like in spine or orthopedics or neurosurgery, you'll have these trade shows. And I was always, the guy walking down the aisle, looking at different products and seeing what I might like and what I might use and whatever. And it was just real interesting to get on the other side of the table and now start trying to get people to stop at the booth to take a look at the products and then explain to them in 10 seconds or, to get their interest before they would move on. It was fascinating to me to see that side of it. And then, of course, when we started the Fastener company and I started interfacing with high-level engineers, and I'm not an engineer, that was also quite an interesting experience and a learning experience, quite honestly.
I'd like to take a turn down that path, if you don't mind, Doctor. Sure. You went from surgeon, the stability of the healthcare system. I use that term loosely when I say stability.
Right.
Into pure entrepreneurship. And now we go from one side of the aisle to the other side of the table, and you have to start a company.
Right.
Walk us through those early days. What did that feel like?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I felt a little like a fish out of water. I was not used to trying to get surgeons interested in a product. I was the guy who would walk down the aisle, and if something, just seemed like a Me Too type product, I would keep walking. And yet, the sales guys would, or ladies would constantly try to get me to stop and look at their product and try to convince me that theirs was better than something else. But the one thing I did with the spine company, and I've done with Endurolock, the fastener company, is I never wanted to invent a Me Too product. I wanted to invent products that were truly unique, that nothing else out there was like them. So that made it, a lot easier in a sense. If I could get somebody's attention to just spend 5 or 10 seconds looking at the product, or better yet, for an engineer, pick up the product and actually touch and feel it, the light bulb would go off in his head, and then the rest of the conversation would be a lot easier. If I just had a little bit better nut and bolt or whatever, something of that nature, it would be a much more difficult job. For our product, there simply is nothing like it, anywhere. So when they look at it, they say, oh, now I see where I could use this, and, I see where the advantages are.
And what's it like to start a business? What does that feel like?
Well, I'm a little fortunate in the sense that when I started my spine company, I partnered with somebody who had more than 20 years experience as an orthopedic distributor with over 100 employees. So it was easier from the point of view that he knew, the business of selling implants. Maybe not like what we designed, but something similar. And then the other thing is I have 2 kids, my son and daughter, and they both have MBAs. And my son was the first employee, and still is employed by my spine company for business development. And he has an MBA finance and accounting. My daughter got an MBA in entrepreneurship, and she is my COO at my fastener company. So, that certainly, brought a level of, knowledge, that I might not have had. And then the other thing that we did when we first were starting the fastener company, the local university, University of Missouri, Kansas City, used to run a 1-year entrepreneurship course. And it would be, one day, every other week, you'd go there for, sometimes, 6 hours, 7 hours, and, you'd go through listening to people tell you how to set up a business, and in essence, take a business plan and take it apart into all of its segments. So you have the marketing plan, the operations plan, and so forth. And that would be the assignments. You'd have to do your operations plan and then present that plan. And in the very end, you would present the entire business plan, and there would be a pitch day, and you'd pitch. And this would go on for, I think it was like nine or 10 months. So, there were a number of things that I already knew because of my experience with my spine company. And obviously both my kids had, knowledge, in their MBA program, but we still got things out of it. I think it was still beneficial. So we did that. And then we did, the Oshkosh Air Show ran a brief, accelerator type program. So, we participated in that as well. And then finally, there was a group that's focused on purely on aerospace, and they ran a type of accelerator, and we participated in that. I mean, the thing is, to give you an idea a little bit about myself, I'm a firm believer that you can always learn something. I mean, even if I'm listening to a lecture at one of these, let's say at the entrepreneurship course, and I pretty much knew everything that was being discussed, I would still sit there and I'd still listen through it, because I might pick up something that I didn't realize, or that, didn't, maybe I had overlooked in my, other company, or, something of that nature. So I'm always open to doing that. And the other thing that affords is networking, and I'm a firm believer that the more you network, the more chances are that you're going to succeed in whatever venture you do.
I would totally agree. And that's one of the things that I want to unpack here. So I want most people to think about the competition it takes to get into neurosurgery. And then assuming that is a filter for people that make great choices and are able to do incredible things. Now look at how someone like that approaches entrepreneurship with some of the tools we all have. Some of the tools that we all have, he comes from a place where he's obviously got a black belt, and Harold enters into another arena and puts on a white belt and takes the place of the learner. That's an incredible statement about you. And I couldn't feel better about what you were saying. I'm a little concerned about how you're going to scale your employees, being that you're making them from scratch. But I have to say that it's that must feel just wonderful that the people inside of your business love and care about it the way you do.
Yeah, I mean, who better to look after your business than your own kids? So that was an easy decision back then. And obviously my wife really liked that as well, because it kept both kids local, as opposed to them flying off and leaving the nest, and, and then we have to travel. So, and keeps the grandkids local. So, it has advantages all around. The other thing too is, I've always been a firm believer that I can learn anything if I can read about it. So, when I started the Fastener company, for example, typically in industry, engineers use CAD programs. So in other words, a 3D representation of whatever they're developing. And one of the products that's often used is SolidWorks. Well, what I ended up doing is I ended up buying my own license outside the company for SolidWorks. And I got some books, and I, listened to some videos, and, I'm not saying I'm a great SolidWorks user, but I certainly know the fundamentals. And the analogy that I like to give is that if you're dealing with engineers, it's just like your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic. The mechanic will look inside and he'll say, okay, I can see XXY that needs to be done, and it's going to take me this long a time, and it's going to cost you this much money. Well, if I don't know anything about what's going on under the hood, I have no idea, whether he's, ripping me off, or whether he's, truly being honest, and this is what it's going to take. Well, the same is true when you deal with engineers. If I have at least some rudimentary knowledge of what's entailed with the process that they go through, number one, it's easier for me to discuss things with them. And number two, I have a very realistic view as to if he tells me it's going to take him 2 weeks, yes, that's appropriate, or maybe there's an issue here. So
That's such a good point. And really, for myself, I remember taking some university courses just online for things like basic accounting, macroeconomics,
right,
things that I knew, because what I understand about entrepreneurship is embedded in what you said. One thing is it's the desire to build it yourself. The thought that I can learn this, that I can figure this out in the competitive pool that I'm in. And then the other one is to basically use your network as a filter now. So for me, I think that a great entrepreneurship is surrounding yourself with people that are better at their things than you are at yours. But there still needs to be those paths of communication. Right. For them to talk to someone who hasn't even developed any type of interest is very difficult for them. And you have to be able to do that. I think that very much encompasses what it takes to be in business. One of the questions that I have for you is, what is your outlook like? So taking a look at what's happening in marketplaces right now, people in the technology industry are wondering, like, does tech always get funded in places like this? Can they move forward? Will businesses get into R&D in uncertain times? Supply chain issues. At the stage that Endurolock is right now, what do you see as a leader on your radar?
Right now, we're really focused on defense and space. If you go back a couple years, back at the time that we won the NASA competition, yes, our product was something that with further development could be used for space applications. What we learned is that we would have to miniaturize the fastener. And it's something, I had no idea about, and maybe, people in the audience listening to this, may not know. But if you look at, for example, a Mars rover, that vehicle is the size of a VW. But yet the great majority of fasteners used on that are 4 millimeters in diameter. Now, it's very different than if you think about it, look inside a car, you'll see, 1/2-inch bolts, 3/4-inch bolts, so forth. Imagine that whole thing is all 4 millimeters. They're tiny. They're like, number 10s, screws.
The grain of rice of nuts and bolts, right?
Well, and the reason being that they firmly believe in redundancy. So, if you have, instead of putting on 5 bolts that are, let's say 3/4 inch, maybe you'll put on 20 that are, 4 millimeters. A few of them fail, you still got a bunch holding everything on. Well, so in any case, back at that, in those days, back in 2019, I was looking at it, okay, well, we are focused really on commercial aerospace. We're focused on oil and gas. And, obviously space applications would be a great marketing thing if NASA would use it. But, what I found is that we would have to miniaturize. Well, then enter the virus. And everything took a downturn. If you look at oil and gas, it took a downturn. They stopped new wells. Look at aerospace. You had to date, no new aerospace platforms. In other words, no new plane that came out from Boeing or came out from Airbus. And in fact, I heard the CEO online from Boeing say that this is towards the beginning of the virus. He said that he didn't expect commercial aerospace to bounce back for about 5 years. And, I think that's, coming true. We're 2 years into this, and I think that's pretty much where we are.
Yeah, we see some of those people that used to be commercial pilots driving Ubers.
Right, exactly. So, what happened for us is that during that time, I started looking at, well, if I can't sell the product into commercial aerospace and oil and gas potential temporarily dried up, well, how are we going to make this company continue to move forward? And I started listening a lot to WebExes put on by various sectors of the government, and started realizing that a tremendous opportunity still existed for space applications and for defense. And if you look at defense, there is a tremendous amount of money being allocated for research and development. And similarly, for research and development for space applications, specifically for defense. I mean, the whole start of Space Force, it's now been in existence for two years. And if you listen to recent, I get newsletters every day for defense and space. And if I look at the ones over the last few weeks, there's been a real focus on, Space Force is on a buying spree this coming year. And why? Because we're essentially getting back into a race that we were when we, back in the Sputnik days, or back in the days when, who was going to get to the moon first. Well, we've been focused a lot on Russia, but quite honestly, a lot of the focus that I hear is on China. And so how do we, win that race? And the only way you win it is by putting a lot of money into R&D. And we're not talking about money into, the big primes like Boeing and Lockheed and Northrop. We're talking about, small businesses that have a unique idea that can really accelerate the U.S.'s role or in space. Getting back for a second to what I was saying earlier about, we think that our fastener is ideal for use in space. I don't know if listeners know this, but the great majority of fasteners on, let's say, a rocket, a missile, a satellite, or any NASA mission, they're all safety wired. And by safety wiring, what I mean is that think of let's say you have a nut and bolt. Think for a second that you have a hole drilled into the nut, and now a mechanic has to pass a wire through that nut, braid it, find the next nut and the appropriate nut so to put the wire through the next hole, and then go to the next fastener and so forth. Well, and you have to find the appropriate fastener, because what you want to do is, if the first one starts loosening, it puts tension on the wire versus the next one. So it takes a certain skill, and on average, a mechanic can safety wire about 10 fasteners per hour. In that same period of time,
ton of time. So I love things that go fast.
right?
I want to release everything all the time. And when you talk to any mechanic that works in racing, the thing that is the hardest thing they deal with is this tedious movement of tying these bolts together so that they make, like, how humans use like a rope bridge to help each other. It's almost like that, so that they have like a relationship through this wire.
I mean, imagine if you have a missile, and you look inside and every fastener is safety wired together. Well, if they can do 10 per hour, imagine the labor time, and typical labor rate being about 150 an hour, that the mechanic, eats up. In that same 1 hour, we could put in over 300 of our fasteners and offer equal, if not better, reliability. So that saves a tremendous amount of time.
I would wonder what David Freed would do with a phrase like that. One of our past guests, David Freed, he has a PhD as well, and he was talking about Six Sigma. And he's basically got a black belt in this manufacturing process that makes massive efficiencies. And the way that you calculate out every single nut, the type of hourly rate that somebody who works on missiles commands, and then having them do something that could be eliminated by using a different nut.
Right.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's exactly what the kind of soft approach I was taking with the truckers is. Eventually, at some point, this will become available to people that are doing these same type of mechanics, because they reduce the amount of parts. Like when you take a look at the average electric vehicle, it only has something like 12,000 components. When you look at the average fuel vehicle, it takes something like 60,000 components. So when you're talking about the way that things fail, it can be a drastic advantage to just reduce the amount of complexities.
Sure. To give you an idea, a 737 has about 400,000 fasteners, and a 777 has about 2.7 million. So it's there was an article once that Boeing put out, I think in the early 2000s, where they claimed that 3% of the cost of the plane was fasteners. And that's not counting all the labor involved, in putting those fasteners in. The other product, however, that is also, we feel very strongly going to make a huge impact is our nut plate. That was in that picture you showed. That was the middle one. And the thing is, nut plates are used for access panels. So if you look, for example, on a plane or helicopter, let's say the mechanic wants to get to the fuel line, the hydraulics. Well, he has to take a panel off to get to it. The bolts are typically retained to the panel by retaining rings that slide up and down channels longitudinally on the bolt. So when he takes the panel off, all the bolts remain attached to the rim. Those bolts do not screw into the substructure. Instead, they screw into a nut plate that is nothing more than a nut within a container that is bonded or riveted to the inner surface of the substructure. Well, with current nut plates, the nut element can only move a little bit side to side. So if the bolt is slightly to the side of where it should be, the nut plate in turn can slide a little bit to accommodate. But the current nut plates cannot tilt. So if you have a large panel, let's say the belly of a plane on an A350 will be a 15-meter panel with 300 bolts attached to the rim. Imagine the mechanics having to line up every single bolt in line before they can start tightening the first. Well, we designed a nut plate that will tip up to 15 to 20 degrees off axis, engage the bolt, and then self-align.
This is like the universal socket of nuts.
Right. I mean, it's the female end of an assembly, and it allows for a tremendous savings in time. And when you start looking at a space application, right now, a big focus for commercial satellite companies as well as defense is to be able to do on-orbit servicing, assembly, and maintenance of satellites. In other words, if you spend, let's say, tens of millions to put a satellite up into geostationary orbit, you do not want that thing to just become obsolete or to run out of fuel and have to launch another one. Ideally, what you'd like is to send up a servicing satellite that will go over to this satellite, refuel it, and take off a module and put on a new module that gives it new capabilities. Well, and you want to do this through a satellite, meaning that it's autonomous. In other words, it's a robotic satellite. With current technologies, if you try to insert a bolt in space, often you will cross-thread because you will be off by a couple degrees. So with current nut plates, they won't work. Our nut plate will engage and then self-align. So if you take the combination of our nut plate with our fastener, it's the ideal building block for on-orbit servicing, assembly, and maintenance of a satellite and for in-space establishment of a physical infrastructure. In other words, you've got to put things together in space. You're going to need some form of a nut and bolt to put it together. And we believe that that's what we will be able to provide.
It is, it's an honor to listen to you today. Someone who has changed the lives of human beings, someone who is making aircraft maintenance and assembly more efficient and effective, and therefore hopefully more cost effective for us to buy plane tickets, and really getting into the defense and the Star Wars race, as I like to refer to it, and also the commercialization of satellites and programs like Starlink. You have impacted humanity, and it's interesting that you have a mindset of continuous learning. You're continuously learning new things, but you also believe in networking. When I suspect there are many that would like to build their network around you. and your immersion. You immerse yourself into this passion, understanding the applications, and are willing to spend money in R&D. Certainly your last product, nobody asked for it. You came up with the idea and put it in the R&D channel, and that's not cheap to do. Respectfully, CNC machinists are probably the most grossly underpaid, and we'd all say the most overpaid there are in the manufacturing process, because they are so vital. And tolerances are not something that people really truly understand until you get into a CNC machine. What would your son and daughter say today if they were on the call with us? What would they say about their dad?
They would probably say that I can never leave work alone. In social situations, I'll see my daughter, and I'm inevitably will bring up some question regarding work, and the same is true with my son. So we'll be at a barbecue or whatever, and I'll have to bring up some question that I had, or wanting to know something, if it was done, or did we get a response from so and so or whatever. So I basically I guess my fault is I'm a workaholic. I work throughout the day, I work throughout the evening, and then I go to bed. So that's pretty much it.
Do you think that they're proud of their dad, and the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship and the leadership and also being just a good dad? Would they have those kind of good things to say about you?
I would think that they do, or I certainly would hope so. I mean, we've won a number of competitions, and had some pretty good honors bestowed upon us. So I feel that it's just keeping your nose to the grindstone, and keep essentially not giving up. Plodding forward. It's interesting. I had a friend of mine years ago that I knew through all my years of practicing as a neurosurgeon. He was on the industry side, but so I knew him when I was actually practicing, and he represented different companies and so forth. And I remember with my spine company, he said it's like a phoenix. Every time you think that it's dead and burnt up, it just comes back to life again. And I mean, you basically have to not get, two things. You have to obviously realize that if your technology has nobody else is interested in it, and then at some point you have to say, well, let's look, let it die, and let's go on to something else. But on the other hand, if you really feel that your technology is worth something, worth improving some aspect of humanity or whatever, you don't give up. I mean, just because you get knocked down once, you get up and you keep trying.
I hope our listeners heard that. I hope they really heard that the key to all of it is resiliency.
Yeah.
Is never giving up and never giving in, and keeping a consistent, almost mission critical passion to the belief that what you have will make a difference. Resiliency is the one quality, along with courage, that I think, Taylor, we've seen from every great leader we've had on this show, that it doesn't matter how many no's, we're going to keep working until we get a yes. That's a quality that more entrepreneurs need to understand and need to embrace. And so we appreciate you pointing that out to our listeners as well.
Yeah, when it comes down to the cross that you were talking about there, Scott, I like how you put it. You're saying that courage plus resiliency. And I almost see it as being fueled by the negative pressure. Harold, you were just describing how when you make nuts dependent on each other through wiring them, that they end up being stronger because of that dependency. When one becomes weak, it actually creates tension that will almost help the rest defend. And that's something that I see as anti-fragility, where you're fueled by the forces against you. And I think that that's something that entrepreneurs really embrace. That's something that obviously lives in with you, because the second time that we get knocked down, like the first time we're often surprised, but the way that entrepreneurs get up the second time they get knocked down by the same thing, you should just see the look in their eye. They're coming to get you. Like, right. Those problems have no chance.
Yep, that's certainly true. I mean, we we face an interesting challenge. Like as with most entrepreneurs, you're spending part of your time developing the product. You're spending part of the time, getting the product out to market, getting market acceptance. But you're also spending part of the time raising money, because all of this takes money. And the unique problem that we have is that our product is not sexy. I mean, if you think about it, a nut and a bolt, and then we'll follow some guy that presents some new app, or some other guy that's talking about a new quantum computer, and here I come on the stage and I say, I got a new nut and bolt. I mean, think about it. People, it's. I'll be honest. I honestly never thought we'd win the NASA competition. With me showing nuts and bolts, but
they find those sexy. The thing is that like a lot of people, they have to. That's the market fit that they talk about. Is that when it comes down to it, you're talking about nuts and bolts, and as a marketer, I'm like, nuts and bolts kind of have a lot of commonalities with being sexy. So if you want to put that angle.
Well, think about it this way. First of all, after all those people you followed on the stage, you can say those are all great computers, and that is a great product. And every single one of those things, wow, just maybe even Nobel Peace, but every single one of them needs a nut or a bolt.
That's true.
And you don't need nuts if you don't have bolts. So I think that you've positioned yourself uniquely well to be able to pivot into the industries that are the most needing. And I suspect NASA awarded you that great tribute because of they're maybe trying to send a message to other people out there. Hey, this stuff really matters, and it really, really matters to us, because how things come together and how they stay together is neuroscience. It's just done at a mechanical level.
And the things that are the highest utility often aren't sexy. Like I remember the first thing that I ever sold was appliances, and trying to get somebody excited about a fridge, it was just like a tough gig, right? And my experience into tech was from that place. I'm a pitchman. So I remember that the day that Eris got into South by Southwest into the tech competition, they literally called me in the morning and said, hey, when can you get to Texas? And I'm like, what do you now? And so literally I wrote our pitch on the plane. We landed, and I had 4 hours with Scott, which is just what an amazing, like Scott Connors is a great guy to work with. But Scott Edgar is also training somebody to do a pitch that is as amazingly intellectually capable as he is. It's so fun. His rote memory is just brilliant. And we played music that I would turn up to get him to emote over the speaker when he started to be too calm. And I looped it over and over again so that we could play it about 30 seconds before he went out to pitch. And he smoked it. Like the way that he looked in the second judge's eyes when he said, my heart's not in the same place your heart is. That was what we were looking for. And it was one of the funnest things ever, is you have 4 hours to train somebody to do a pitch in front of 4 billionaires and 800 people.
Right.
But that's the type of pressure you're talking about when you're going to get on and tell people about nuts and bolts right after they talked about a supercomputer, right? Like it's those people that you're about to be in front of. And the great thing is that NASA they understand more than anybody. They understand why to use 20 volts instead of 4.
Right. I always joke because obviously I've been in front of numerous audiences of all engineers at every single prime, Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop, NASA, and I always joke that in essence I'm like a TV engineer. If you see a show and the engineer is on the show, he has to know a certain amount of stuff that that he can come across as being realistic. For me, I've learned over the years, and I can answer probably about 90% of the questions that are posed to me. And we're talking, high level engineers. I got a meeting coming up in 2 weeks, for example, with the top engineers from Space Systems Command, Space Operations Command, Space Vehicle Directorate out of Air Force Research Lab. So, I mean, I know I'm going to have an audience that, some pretty intelligent people. And, again, I can answer Probably about 90% of the questions. But I'll tell you, I always bring an engineer. I bring one of my engineers so that for those 10%, he can answer. The irony, however, is that sometimes they pose a question. I turn to one of my engineers. I say, "Okay, I'll let why don't you answer this?" And I'll get a response like, "I'll have to get back to you guys." And then I said to myself, I just paid for him to fly to California or whatever for this meeting. I could have said that. I'll get back to you.
I do deer in headlights just fine.
Harold, in the VC world, we have a lot of jokes, as you can imagine. But one of the jokes we have is, what do you get when you put a room full of engineers together? I don't know either, but we want to invest in it.
Oh, I got one as well. What's the only thing 7 engineers will agree on? What the 8th engineer is doing wrong. Well, that's amazing. So I want to shift a little bit here. I want to know what your outlook or reaction is to some things that have been going on. Now, Scott's constantly sending me things. He's like my eye in the sky. The chief change officer of Crankset Group. Scott has consulted some of the most amazing companies in their leadership. And to just kind of be on his feet and get in his head is something that I enjoy. Now, Scott, you had put up this information and we had clipped it. Now, take us a little bit into what you see.
Yeah, so this is and I know Vail Resorts out of Broomfield, Colorado very well. They went public. They used the money to buy a series of resorts all over the country. Really, they continue to buy, they acquire, and really what they're looking for is not ski resorts. They want the real estate at the bottom because people come and they pay for lodging, and then you can have different price points and can charge $200 a day for a lift ticket at Vail versus say down the road at Keystone or Breckenridge, where it'd be less. Different price points, different market demographics. But this is a company that has spent a tremendous amount of time trying to machine learn the business and forgot about taking care of people that are actually people, and really rested on this mindset of our employees that, they have a free ski pass, they'll be fine. And the rest of it is, here's your hours, it's a machine. Here's your health benefits, it's a machine. And it has caused a tremendous movement of employees and labor from all Vail resorts. And it's reflected in the stock price. And so 2 thoughts here, and Harold, I'd like your take on it. Take care of your people now more than ever, or you're in trouble. And number 2, the markets are not going to just look at earnings per share anymore. They're going to look at your culture, and they're going to look at how you take care of your people, because that's the resiliency of the enterprise going forward. And that's what I see in this graph. Harold, what is your take on that?
Well, I mean, you have to take care of your people. What we do with Enduralock is we have a very flexible schedule. When we just hired, for example, a robotics and electromechanical engineer, one of the things I told him before he started, or before he accepted the job, is that we're not just like a 9 to 5. Where you're regimented. You have to come in at 9, you have to finish by 5, and do that every day of the week. If something comes up, you want to come in at 11, or and stay late, or you want to work a few hours on the weekend, or you want to come in early, because let's say you needed a couple of extra days. He was, in his particular case, he was going to with one of my other engineers, he was planning a trip to India. Well, he needed a couple extra days to be able to go to India. Well, all right. So he spent a few Saturdays or Sundays working on the project, accumulating time. So we're very, very flexible. And I think, employees appreciate that, I always try to keep the employees also in the loop of everything. So, for example, we have 2 meetings a week with all the engineers. And mind you, a number of our engineers work remotely, so we don't even I don't even see them. They're other than on the screen. So I think with today's technologies, it can work that you have things remotely, we allow that, and we allow them to have a flexible schedule. It's always interests me when I get, I'm, as I said, I'm a workaholic, so I'm on my computer pretty much all evening as well. And I'll get emails about, something, a drawing that was just done or whatever, it could be midnight. And, I get that from one of my engineers. So, it's the flexibility. And,
people often call this autonomy. And they value things like the autonomy over their time or schedule, also the autonomy of the team that they will work with or become part of. Some people, when they get to pick their immediate partners, it really changes their outcomes. So these are all kinds of things that tie in to the things that you're often coaching companies about, Scott. A lot of good things that you mentioned there, Harold.
Yeah, flexible schedule. We don't care when you get the job done because we trust you.
Right.
Inclusion. We share everything with our employees. If I know it, everybody in the room, everybody in the ecosystem will know it. And then remote work. We can be a virtual company. We don't just allow it. It's just who we are. It's part of our ecosystem. So it sounds to me like, Harold, you're listening to your employees, but you're also treating them as you want them to treat you. And that's with respect, empowerment, and inclusion. Good for you, and really good for Endurolock. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, now we've got a little bit more here that I want to react to. Now, Wall Street Journal had also put out some information about what this was leading to. So, Scott, you were alluding to how you treat your workers will affect your outcome. Well, now workers quit job at a record level in November. I'm going to leave. I want to talk to Harold about this before, Scott, we get your take. Harold, what do you think this is? Like, we've been talking about this quite a bit with the Great Resignation. From your scope, do you have any thoughts on why people are leaving their jobs in record numbers?
Well, I think part of it is that you have people that were, let's say, close to the point of retirement, and when the virus hit and things became crazy. There were some, I'm sure, that just said, I'm close enough. I have enough, saved up, maybe not as much as what I was hoping, but enough. And so they quit. I certainly saw that in medical a while back, where, they just said, I'm done. I don't need to deal with this anymore. So I think that's part of the problem. Again, it really depended on, I think, to a certain extent, the flexibility that the company would offer the employees. If they were totally flexible, allowing them to work at home and not, being super a manager that would have them under their thumb, meaning having some remote programming that would see exactly when the eyeballs of the employee were looking at the screen, or you have to trust your employees to some extent. I basically, my feeling is I'll trust somebody until they prove that I shouldn't trust them. If they get the work done and they do it at home, or I don't care, they can go to the beach and take their laptop as long as they get the work done. And I've never had that problem. Maybe I'm fortunate, but, we're a small team. We're up to, I think, now 7. I have not had somebody quit, in that team, with Endurolock. I guess I haven't really seen, what was shown on that graph personally in my company.
And one of the reasons you haven't seen it is because of your culture, because of those very behaviors that you believe the ecosystem can thrive on, and it's all based on the foundation of trust. You trust your people until they prove to you that you shouldn't trust them. Right. And your vendors. Endurolock has 7 in the ship, but the vendors and the people that are manufacturing these boats and the manufacturing relationships. There is an ecosystem. If you looked at everything encompassing there, right. And what we're finding is, if you looked outside, your core ecosystem there, and you get out into that space with the vendors, that's where it's being impacted more and more. And what we're finding, and boy, I've spent a lot of time on this in the past couple of weeks, is appreciation. People go to work and they don't feel appreciated. They don't feel like what I'm doing is adding value to the organization, and the organization doesn't appreciate and value me. I don't want that anymore in my life. The pandemic, humanity has taught us to go back and take care of ourselves at a little bit deeper level. It used to be you got a job, you clocked in, you did your work, you made your parents proud, and you sooner or later you got some rewards on that, right? Now it's about me, the person, me, the human being, and how I feel every day, because that was stripped from us in the pandemic. So I think it's mission critical. You're already doing it, to appreciate everybody in your ecosystem and just stop and say thank you. We could not open this restaurant today if you weren't washing those dishes. So thank you very, very much for that. And it's the little people that feel it the most. The dishwashers, which are so very valuable to the supply chain, to linking the bolts together within the restaurants. And it's the manufacturers that are on the CNC machine, and the suppliers and the UPS drivers that are backing in, and the warehouse workers at Amazon. It's all of us. We are all part of this interconnected supply chain. And if we don't say thank you to each and every element of that, we'll continue to see these resignations happen until corporations figure it out and retool and invest in the assets that matter to corporations most, their people.
Right. Exactly. I'll tell you just one quick thing. When I have meetings, with, let's say, in the last 2 years, most of them have been virtual. So let's say I have a meeting with a prime or with a government agency, I don't really have to have all my engineers on the call. I could honestly do the meeting and have maybe one engineer. But what I typically do is I'll have them all on the call. They'll all sit there, but that, and not necessarily contribute at the time of the meeting, but it involves them. And it also, I think it will allow one of them to say, oh, I didn't think of that. That was brought up by so-and-so engineer at the other company. Maybe I have an idea how we can get around that. It's a lot better than, me coming back with a synopsis of how the meeting went. And, I'm going to miss things, that may be important, that one of them would pick up on. It involves them, so they feel part of, every single, in essence, essentially every meeting that we have. They're all there.
Yeah, and that's inclusion. They feel included. They got to talk to the Space Force people today. That feels good to them. They get to listen in on what the wants and needs are, what the questions are, and they get to weigh in. It's not you having to come back and debrief them as if there's this structured environment of communication. Right. It's, hey, we get to talk to Space Force today. We get to talk to Boeing tomorrow. They feel included, part of that decision-making process. And when you do that, people stay. And you've proven that point by having the perfect record of no one having yet left you. Congratulations on that.
They also did a study with radiologists, and they took some imagery looking for primary, secondary, and tertiary issues, and ran the scans, and then took the same group of pictures, running them through the sample size of radiologists 6 months later. But the second time around, they attached the Facebook profile picture for the patient, and it drastically improved the outcome. And so when you're having yourself, even on Zoom meetings with the other team, the faces, as humans, we're coded to that. We care more about that company than we did yesterday. We're more emotionally invested in the success and outcome of that relationship. That's a huge win. I like what you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as we wrap this up today, I actually, and we've not done this before, Taylor, but I think the good doctor has earned this. What parting words would you have for entrepreneurs out there that have an idea but just don't know what to do with it?
I mean, what I would say is continue to develop your idea, network, and by networking, you may find somebody that can help you with your idea, help you to develop it, partner with you. Don't be afraid of, giving up a little bit, to bring the idea to fruition. I mean, the old saying goes, you could, try to bring your idea to fruition, and you could have 100% of one pie, or you could have 1% of the other pie. depending on how much you give up in partnering with other people or bringing in money and so forth. But if the 100% of the one pie is a real small pie, and the 1% of the other pie is a huge pie, you'll find out you did a lot better with the latter.
Yeah, that's great advice and well said.
And I got one question that cued me from this. So you were in this amazing place that so many people view as the Mount Everest of being a doctor, like being a neurosurgeon. That's the tip, and obviously you don't have a lot of wants there when it comes to finances and so on. Why did you how did you leave? There's so many people that would have that great idea and be like, well, the risk of leaving my position to explore this is so high. What was that like?
Well, I mean, in essence, I really didn't leave. I mean, I kept practicing as a neurosurgeon, but I would spend all my, again, I'm a workaholic. So all of my free time, all of my vacation time would be devoted to trying to move the company forward, and then, employing people that would help, do that. So, I didn't really give it up in that sense. No, certainly my practice suffered because, I could have, the practice could have done, a lot more, if I weren't, devoting more time to the company. I'll tell you one final interesting story. When the first accelerator, or that when we did that 1-year course in entrepreneurship, I mentioned at the end we had a pitch, and so I pitched, and they chose I don't know, I forget if it was 3 or 4 companies that won various prizes, ranging up to, I think the biggest prize is, I don't know, 15,000 or whatever. Well, we had mentors that were part of the judging. In other words, they all got together, so we had mentors for my company and all the other companies, and they all got together and they judged, the pitches and whatever. And we didn't win. And, I heard from a couple of our mentors later that the feeling amongst a lot of the judges was we were a fantastic company, or had a fantastic potential. But he's a neurosurgeon. He doesn't need money. So why are we going to have him win?
Oh, yeah.
So, that's unfortunately the reality. But,
you were like overqualified for who they wanted to invest in.
Exactly.
Well, what I heard you say, and a great way to end the call is, if you're going to start the road to entrepreneurship and go down that rabbit hole, which we highly encourage, don't quit your day job just yet. But in your off hours, stay focused on what you want to do and follow that dream in your off hours, so that one day you have a choice to do it, and then ultimately your dream takes you on board the ship and you're off to the races.
Exactly.
And those are wise words from Scott Connors, the Chief Change Officer of Crankset Group, as we close another episode of Leadership Line of Sight. This week, we have Harold Hess, PhD, neurosurgeon, and the CEO and founder of EnduraLock, who is changing the way that everything we hold valuable is held together. We really appreciate everything brought forth today. Thank you so much for joining us, Harold. It was truly... it was just great to listen. You've got so much to share.
Agreed.
Well, thank you both. It was my pleasure to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Everybody else, have a remarkable day, and we will see you next time.